Hello everybody, and welcome to Some Patches Required, a show where we hope to educate and entertain you on the ever-turbulent games industry. As always, my name is Zach, and I'm one of your hosts.
And I am your other host, Aaron.
And as you can tell by our tone at some point, if you couldn't already, it is early on a Monday morning, and we're going to be talking about a kind of eldritch topic, if you will, which is AI again. More specifically, we are going to be talking about the fact that Disney and Universal are suing AI firm Midjourney, and we're going to do our best to not get overly philosophical and confuse even ourselves. But before we get into that, I did want to say thank you to all of our returning and our existing listeners. You're all amazing. We do what we do because of you, and because I think we just like recording at this point.
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
Like and subscribe, please, or interact in whatever way it is on the specific platform that you happen to listen to our podcast on. And then, if you wouldn't mind too much, recommending us to a friend, or as we like to say, a mortal enemy. It is equal in our book. We appreciate all forms of recommendation. And
indeed,
before we jump into it, we're going to be pretty critical of AI today. And because of that, we are going to ask, do you believe that AI-generated images constitute fair use, or are they wholly original works? I guess technically, and are they, not or are they, because that's not a binary. If you believe they do constitute fair use, then you probably also would think that they're wholly original,
yeah.
Or maybe you wouldn't think one. Point is, what are your thoughts? Fair use? Wholly original? Yeah.
Complete straight up and down theft, somewhere in the middle.
Grand larceny.
Grand Theft Auto.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. That's for the SEO. No, yeah. But do share your thoughts on where you sort of land in this debate, because like Zach said, we are going to try to not wade too far into the murky philosophical waters of this. I think we'll probably end up touching on it a little bit just because it's almost unavoidable. But there is a lot of, regretfully, there is a lot of interpretation to be found within this topic. And I'm sure a lot of people who don't work for AI firms, because we know what they think, have, nuanced opinions on this. So feel free to share them. We'd be happy to engage in a little conversation down in the comment section on YouTube. In regards to that. So yeah, be interested to hear what y'all think.
Diving into it. Well, actually, before we even dive into it, I'm trying to think like how I can set up in this episode for a fun, like, little Mickey Mouse sound clip, like, or, I always think of, whenever I think of Mickey Mouse, for some reason, the South Park episode comes into my brain every time, where it's like Mickey Mouse basically abusing the Jonas Brothers for monetary gain. It's actually very fucked up. Oh boy! But if you ever want to see Mickey Mouse cursing, that's a great place to go. On the note of our little boy Mickey, Disney and Universal, as I mentioned, are suing the AI firm Midjourney for copyright infringement. Presumably, most of our listeners know who Disney and Universal are, at least in the film and entertainment space. So I'm not going to belabor that point. But if you haven't heard, Midjourney is one of the leading AI-generated image platforms. So you can go onto Midjourney, you can type in a prompt, and it will generate an image for you utilizing AI. And right now that does include very clearly copyrighted material. So in the case of Disney and Universal, they're upset about people's abilities to make things like Shrek or the Minions or even our good friend Mickey. basically just make full copyrighted material that isn't really different from the original content that Disney or Universal would be making.
Yeah, and when we're talking about well, it makes sense in a lot of ways that it would be a Disney or a Universal, because if you think about just how much value there is to those companies in a handful of IPs, be it for, licensing those images out to products like Fortnite, or just, making sure that they're protecting their sort of brand identity by not having a gajillion unlicensed official looking versions of their characters just like flooding the internet. They do stand to lose money in many ways as a result of not being able to effectively control those IPs, because they're just so valuable. Which is indicative of the fact that, like, I find it a little bit funny, and this is a very slight tangent, that it's Disney and Universal who are currently in the process of pummeling each other back and forth over, their theme parks, especially. Yeah. Where, for the longest time, Disney was the undisputed theme park king, and then Universal managed to either land valuable IPs in Harry Potter and then generate a handful of its own extremely valuable IP in the form of, Minions, Shrek, and others. And now they're, if not equal players in both entertainment and, theme park stuff, they're at least a lot more competitive than they would have been 15, 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's clearly a lot of money on the table here, and it's interesting that these two are the ones kind of taking the battle there. And they're the first ones out of Hollywood to do so, if I'm not terribly mistaken, at least on that scale.
Well, that's what's being reported, and it's certainly the first ones that I've heard of. It's also funny when you read any of these articles, because it seems like a lot of the people were getting anxious about whether this was even going to happen in the first place. So a lot of these articles are almost like a sigh of relief when it finally happened. They were holding their breath for somebody in Hollywood to have some kind of a legal dispute with an AI firm, and finally it's happened. I think the other thing that's important to note is, from the Disney and Universal perspective, not even digging into anything that's particularly esoteric, a lot of these AI-generated image websites, you have to pay some kind of like a subscription for. Not all of them, but a lot of them you do. So if you look at it,
definitely do.
Yeah, Midjourney you definitely do. So if you look at it from a plagiarism copyright perspective, generally speaking, these companies don't care if you draw their characters and you post them online if you're not making any money. But the minute that you are making money off of their IPs, they want a portion of that cut, or they want you to stop entirely. And as it stands, they get nothing when people go to Midjourney and they're like, I want Shrek kissing Darth Vader. I want Shrek pregnant with Anakin Skywalker's child. These are very strange examples, but for some reason, I feel like the internet likes to make Shrek pregnant. Don't look into that. You don't need to. Someone's already done that for you. Regardless of any of those points, I think that's a huge issue here, is Disney and Universal see this as them missing money or losing out on money that they should be making.
That was going to be like, my rug pull curtain snap open moment at some point. Once we get into like what the further implications for these lawsuits could be, because this isn't the first time that companies have sued AI firms over copyright infringement, but it is the first time that juggernauts like Disney have done it in the Hollywood space, so like the direct entertainment realm. And so if you're anything like me, your mind starts to run wild with the idea of like what will and won't be possible at certain points in the future in regards to really anything to do with utilizing AI and training AI. And could this even be the sort of thing that that stops AI from being trained on copyrighted materials at large just because of the sheer amount of funding behind these lawsuits. And then all of that just kind of trickles away because you realize that the main gripe here is exactly what Zach said. It is that they aren't mad necessarily about anything other than the fact that they've been cut out of the financial equation. Midjourney is making its minimum of $9.99 a month for people to make pregnant Shrek images, but Universal's not getting paid for any of those pregnant Shrek images. That's the gist of it, right? So I that just kind of adds to my cynicism regarding this entire thing, but it is 100% a financial play. These giant companies are upset that they're not being appropriately compensated for the use of their copyrighted images that another company is now profiting from, rather than, just leaving it to the denizens of deviant art.
I would have to assume that some element of this may also just be IP control, right? Because as it stands, if you want, so sticking on the lewd content side, right? If you want full control over your safe for work children's IPs, I can only imagine that AI does threaten that a little bit, because now people have at the click of a button basically a way to generate content that could be completely counter to the kind of safe for work nature of your content, right? Especially if you're Disney. Disney tends to want to keep things PG-13, if not, more accessible. And when you have the ability to make this graphic kind of content at a click of a button and then flood the internet with it, I feel like that does pose some kind of a threat to their IP and their ability to feel like they're in control of it. Like if I remember correctly, didn't Overwatch take a lot of issue with the porn that was being made of Overwatch characters originally? I mean, I think they've completely given up on that at this point. Yeah. But people care about the way that their IP is portrayed. This does threaten that to some degree.
Yeah, without a doubt. I definitely think there's an IP control element to all of this, but I also feel like the degree to which IP control can be enforced in the realm of take AI out of it, but go back to just fan art, right? That ship more or less sailed with the internet. Do you know what I mean? There have definitely been attempts to take some of this stuff down, and some of them have been successful, but ultimately, if we're sticking on the lewd side of things, all right, the existence of Rule 34 is, proof that you can't really clamp down on something when there's just people out there who will want to make it. For whatever reason it is, they want to make these images, or they want to write these stories, or they want to really just get into the nastiest of details regarding how the kiss with Darth Vader led to an impregnation by non-Darth Vader Anakin Skywalker, the chronology of which I find fascinating, but the details of which I don't necessarily need. But if someone really wants to explore that, they're going to explore it, they're going to post it online, and that's just out there now. And if it's on the internet, it's extremely hard to take off in its entirety, right? But sorry.
Well, I was going to say, I have to assume that there is a slight difference when it comes to how these large media companies think about it, because to your point, and by the way, I'm not saying that this kind of parody shouldn't be allowed. I'm not going to tell you how to eat your burritos, so to speak. But, what I am saying is, if I was a large multimedia conglomerate and I cared about this kind of stuff, I would be upset with how easy it is, and
that's
how
exactly what I was going to say.
Accelerates someone's ability to alter your brand image, right? I think that's the problem that they would see, is that someone can sit down for 10 minutes and generate, we'll just say 10 images, right? that are all lewd, all potentially against the brand. Whereas if they were to make it organically through their own artistic skill, they could maybe make some like really rough doodles, but AI is always going to be faster for the most part when you're talking about art creation, right?
Yes. It's going to be faster. It's going to produce results that look closer to the finalized version of copyrighted images. Yeah. And it was directly trained on those copyrighted images. So I can see those three factors definitely changing the stakes for these companies. But at the end of the day, I'm sure that there are a lot of extremely wealthy, well-educated people in positions of power inside of boardrooms at these companies who are going, essentially, and it's maybe a slightly weak turn of phrase to use, but essentially, if you can't beat them, join them, right? Like, there is no stopping this. Unless you can halt these models in their tracks by just completely cutting off their ability to be trained on copyrighted images at large, which would be an enormous blow to the AI industry as a whole. Such an enormous blow, such an expensive blow, in fact, that I doubt that will ever happen. Even if it should, I doubt that will happen because there's just too much money behind stopping, like allowing that to continue. Short of that, there is no stopping these sort of images from being generated, right? And this, of course, does not just apply to the lewd stuff. It applies just to like, hey, draw me Homer Simpson. And then you put that up as your, header image on something or whatever. Midjourney still profited from that. And ultimately, instead of if you can't beat them, join them, it's if you can't beat them, you could at least profit from them, right? The idea that they've lost an entire revenue stream from residuals on the images that were used in training, or, at the very least, there being some like notification function that what's being generated is copyrighted imagery or it was made of copyrighted imagery. These are all things that I have to imagine Disney and Universal are like considering as they're pursuing this lawsuit, because ultimately, in theory, they actually stand to profit more from collaborating with AI in a mutually financially beneficial structure than they do from shutting the entire endeavor down. And at the end of the day, these companies are publicly traded, so their first responsibility is to the shareholders. And if this seems like an alternative revenue stream, they may just pursue it.
Yeah, I'd have to see a lot of that, because my understanding is that a lot of these AI companies are very expensive to run just based on the literal hardware requirements that are required. I don't think that they have the money to strike licensing deals with all these different companies. And just while we're talking about licensing deals, there have been some examples of companies cutting deals with AI models. Some of the ones that we found that were listed were Dash, Meredith. There's also Vox Media. There's News Corp, The Atlantic. These are examples of companies. Some of these are obviously like newspaper publications, journalistic publications. But these are examples of companies cutting licensing deals so that their content can be ingested by AI models. What I will say, though, is AI, I don't think is even profitable yet. I think it's still in that phase where there's all this speculation about like what it could do and all the money that it could bring in. But I don't think a lot of these standalone websites are very profitable yet. So I don't think they have the money to help Disney make the billions of dollars that they would probably want to make, because anyone can suddenly make Disney content. Eventually people will be making like Disney movies and films and stuff and posting it on YouTube and whatnot. And Disney is going to care a hell of a lot more about that than just random static images, because that directly competes with their movies and their content and whatever. What I will say real quick, though, to your point, a lot of these large corporations have a vested interest in AI working to some degree because they want to use it as a way to enhance and improve their production process. At least that's what they would say. Really what it is they want to cost cut. They want to speed things up and cost cut.
Yeah, without a doubt.
But they can do all of that without Midjourney existing in the form that it exists. Because basically, what these AI models do is they're trained on a bunch of different images and content, and then they regurgitate something that looks like the images and content that they were trained on. Disney has so much art, so much animation, so many movies, film, TV show. I just realized movie and film do the same thing, but you know my point, right?
Yeah,
so much art to draw from. They could have their own internal version of Midjourney and just train it on their own content, and it would still help them achieve their goals. They don't need Midjourney to be a publicly accessible tool to help them, be more efficient, air quotes, right?
True.
It's the same thing with like Blizzard. Like how much art exists of Titan, which was Overwatch. Literally so much concept art has come out of Blizzard. They don't need, they could just literally pump an AI model full of all their concept art and get the same outcome as what already exists. They don't need their art to be publicly available to people.
True, but I will say, and this is not necessarily in defense of AI, but it is in defense of the sheer volume of information, the sheer staggering number of data points collected from even a single image, right? Multiplied by the entire internet is a hell of a lot more than even what Disney has in their vault, right? Is a hell of a lot more than even what Blizzard has in their vault. Take any individual company's IP in a silo and compare it to the amount of information being processed by any of these models on the entire internet. And if these models are working as I understand them, the more information they're fed, the more nuanced the result that comes out, right? Because there's simply more material from which to draw, almost literally. And then they're more able to, the system is more able to confidently remix it into something that is the facsimile of originality, right? As opposed to winnowing that down to only the stuff produced by the one company. Could they still probably get their previs done? Yeah. I'm sure that there would be plenty of ways for them to use that tool set to optimize stuff out, but the actual foundation of what they're pulling from would be limited in a way that wouldn't necessarily benefit the model, and might limit its output. But you would get around all of these fucking copyright issues, and it would definitely protect a Disney or Universal from, in 5 years, Johnny YouTube makes Minions 12 entirely using an AI model, and it looks surprisingly like what an actual Minions movie would be. But I don't know. I think I don't know. I almost fell down the philosophical hole there for a sec. I had to dig myself out. I had to dig myself out of the philosophical hole.
Well, to your point, these models do get stronger the more data they have access to, which is why these AI companies want access to more data. But I think the important thing looking forward is to really understand why. Well, it's not even to understand it. It's to implement AI in a balanced way. I'm quoting in this Associated Press article, but talk about AI and approach AI in a balanced way that protects both IP, but also embraces a human-centered approach to the tool. I think AI can be a tool. I think there are things that it can help everybody with, but I think that in its current iteration, a lot of these companies have been like, we have no idea how AI is going to shape the future. We're just kind of here for the ride. Yeah. And it's like, okay, but you can shape the way that it is interpreted and utilized. Like, that's product development. That is literally the way that we have always developed products. We've never developed products and then been like, we don't know how the microwave's going to help people. We're excited to see the future. We don't know how the dishwasher is going to help people. We're excited to see the future. Like, we can shape the way that these things are utilized. We can shape the discourse. There's a way to promote and talk about and develop AI that is human-centered, that does not take jobs that people want, take creativity that people want to express. Like, it's bullshit is what I'm getting at a little bit. These people just want to get the most money. They want to have the least amount of regulation around their product because they view regulation and these constraints that are important as a way to limit the amount of money that they can get access to. And I think that leads to inappropriate AI development. I'm not wholly against AI conceptually, but I think that the people that are pushing for it do not actually have people at the center of why they care. And a lot of the things that they suggest are just bullshit. Like, they keep saying, oh, it's just like when the, I almost said the photograph came out. I meant camera came out. And like, people were like, well, this is going to like replace all artists and whatever. And it's like, I can understand why people would say that. And then obviously the camera ended up being its own art form. But they're not the same. The camera was not impacting all industries and disrupting society potentially at the same scale that AI is. And people don't understand that AI is a much more disruptive force, not even in the job market, but also in the way that people think about things. And the education around it is incredibly bad because people treat it like this genie that knows everything. And it's I don't know, that it's starting to get a little bit out of the art side of it. So I'll stop my rambling. But it's irresponsible. There's a lot of irresponsible education around AI.
I completely agree. To go back to like your camera angle for a sec, it reminds me, I was reading an article about some long-standing musicians who I think had maybe like penned op-eds or something like that around the time that the synthesizer came out. And they were discussing the ethics and the, change in the shape of music when somebody who cannot read bass clef, does not play the trombone, does not own a trombone, and in fact cannot play the instrument at all, can press a button and incorporate the trombone into their music, right? Or any other instrument, obviously. Extrapolate that out as far as you want, because the instrument itself had been digitally synthesized in such a way that it could then be kind of folded into other people's musical compositions. And there were people who were wondering at that time, like, well, this is not a trombone, it's artificial. Is there not something lost in the music that somebody who does not know this instrument can now just pick this instrument up and play it? And I don't think that the synthesizer has meant the death of music. I think, much like with AI, you can make an argument that it has sort of democratized music creation outside of like a super specialized group. But I do think that there's a lot of, heart lost, a lot of intention lost, a lot of talent that is now not valueless for its own sake, but valueless in a monetary sense in some ways. And I think, again, even that argument, moving forward into the digital age, nothing even comes close to the level of disruption that AI is posing in general. And like you said, the education is bad. The people who are pushing the AI are pushing the AI as quickly as possible into as many things as possible, while actually caring to A, educate the public, B, have any sort of idea over, like, any sort of concept of like the arc of AI, the goals of AI, except for to disrupt, to change, to streamline. That it's all just chaos right now. And even if the companies themselves are not inherently profitable on the back of the product, they are rolling in more money than they know what to do with, because everyone can smell the money coming from the companies that will actually, make something that becomes profitable. All of the money going around in AI is the reason we're seeing AI in everything. So these companies are extremely well funded, and there's almost an element to like some of the open AI stuff that almost feels like their lack of direction is almost a built-in mea culpa, where instead of coming back 30 years from now and apologizing for wiping out 3/4 of the jobs in the entertainment industry for humans, they're just already starting out by saying like, well, I don't know where it's going to go. It's powerful technology and I'm just giving it to the people. Let the people decide where it goes. It's like a preemptive apology. So, can't blame me. Can't blame me for this. I'm Sam.
Yeah, it feels very offensive and stupid to me, because it feels like all these people are like, it's an inevitability. We have to do this thing. It has to happen. I'm going to be a little absurdist for a second, but with the AI, I see all these articles about like the, oh God, I forgot what it's called. There's some moment in sci-fi where it's basically like AI becomes smarter than people, and it surpasses like our ability to learn and all this other stuff. I think
you're thinking of the Singularity.
Singularity, thank you. Yeah, and I keep seeing all this stuff about like the Singularity could happen in the next 5 years. The Singularity, basically some maybe not apocalyptic event, but maybe not good event for humanity, right? And I just sit there and I think, okay, why then are we promoting the development of these tools? It's the equivalent of like humanity is building their own demise and they could stop at any time, but because they want money so badly, they're like, yeah. I don't care. I'm going to keep doing it. I like the money. And it's embarrassing is what it is. Like it's and again, I don't necessarily believe in the singularity with this form of AI. I think that generative AI is actually dumb. I don't think it's what we think of when we think of sci-fi intelligence. But like, it's funny to see these articles talking about these doomsday events related to AI, and it's like, this is all within our control. We could just stop now. We could just like pull the ripcord, but no one wants to do it because money and short-sightedness and all of these different things. It's very it's just very pathetic and kind of embarrassing for humans in general.
I mean, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's a train wreck we're watching in real time with the full power and in some cases desire to stop it, but we're all just kind of muddling along. Because there is absolutely nothing that I can do at my level to impact the motion of this event, right? This is happening because people with money made it happen and want it to happen so that they can make more money. That is ultimately all it is. The reason that, and to be honest, a lot of the time I end up thinking about the fact that these models have been like, first off, they've been trained. Social media led directly to this. In many ways, the sheer volume of new written content and visual content released to the internet every second is vital to the training of these models. So without that technology in place, these AI models may never have happened, right? And then you add in the fact that it's being trained on stolen stuff, just fully lifted. And I promise we will get back to that because I do have some points to kind of draw this back into the realm of what we're actually talking about. But it's all just for profit by the percentage of the population that seeks to continue exponentially growing the number, right? The line we always talk about goes up. And it's why overnight Google Gemini existed, and overnight Microsoft Copilot was embedded into your Notepad app. Why? Why is it embedded into your Notepad app? It's moving at a speed that can only be achieved with extraordinary funding. And yeah, I mean, I don't think this is going to be the technology that gets us to like doomsday robots, but it is certainly the first step on that path, and we're taking it so brashly with no real consideration for like educating the public thoroughly on how it works, how it should be used, what it should be trusted for, what it shouldn't be trusted for. You know, it's already completely changed the way that web searches work. I did a Google search earlier today when we were trying to like do this, you know, little last minute prep for the episode, and I realized how short page 1 of Google is now, because 2/3 of it is AI results. It's different synthesis elements of AI telling you things, and then like 3 links at the bottom of the page. You almost have to go to page 2 on Google. When was the last time you went to page 2 on Google to find a relevant search result?
Not probably consistently since college. I mean, like in college, I would go more to page 2, but
right. I mean,
rarely recently.
Exactly. But you almost have to actually find the sources now. The internet is becoming, the front page of the internet is becoming an AI essay, and the rest of it is the bibliography. And that happened basically overnight. And there were plenty of, people online complaining about it, and plenty of articles complaining about that, and saying, oh, well, this is bad for, access to information, accurate information. But it didn't change the fact that the company that controls the ebb and flow of information made that choice without consulting anybody, and the rest of us are just living with it. And we will continue to live with it, and it will continue to shape the way that we access and interpret information. Just as like an illustrative example of the sort of reckless way that this is being implemented on a day-to-day basis. But
well, the one thing
anyway,
but before we go back directly to the story, I did just want to comment on your synthesizer and the camera example. Another reason that it's not analogous to AI is literally being pitched and developed as a means to lay off people.
Yeah.
It is directly being advertised in some cases as a replacement for people entirely. There's some AI company that's trying to sell virtual business development representatives and like certain roles. And literally it's talking about how the AI doesn't need PTO. It doesn't make excuses, all these different things.
Yeah, I think we covered that in our last AI episode, actually.
I can't remember if we directly covered that exact example, but regardless, AI is literally being positioned as a tool to directly replace people. When the camera was coming out, it was not being sold as a way to directly replace people from the workforce. Same thing with the synthesizer. Like, did it impact people and their jobs? I'm sure it did. I'm sure some people needed to make a shift. But AI fundamentally is there to remove people from the workforce, and then they lie and say that these people will find new jobs and new jobs will be created, which is not true, because the whole purpose is to cut jobs. Companies don't want to make new jobs. They want to cut jobs, and then they try and say that you will make your own company, which is hard, and you may not have the funding to do it, and only so many companies kind of can exist in like this current world. Like, it's all bullshit. They say stuff that they think will trick people into buying it, but when you think about it for more than 10 minutes, it all falls apart. You brought up a good point that relates to the Disney Universal suing AI a second ago, which was talking about the front page of Google. And I know one of the issues that a lot of news sites have had with AI is that summary that Google gives you that's AI generated. Mm-hmm. And it makes it so people no longer go to pages, so that these news outlets can't get their advertising dollars from you clicking on the page. And the way that this relates is the New York Times actually sued OpenAI. I believe it started a year ago for this exact reason. People were not going to the New York Times for their news. Instead, they were being fed articles that had word-for-word paragraphs or sentences from the New York Times that were not properly cited. And so, ChatGPT was getting all the attention, was getting all the money, or OpenAI was getting all the money, and New York Times was seeing nothing, even though their content was being directly ripped and plagiarized for money.
Yeah.
Or at minimum views.
Yep. I mean, yeah. There's not much else to it but that. Yeah. There's is it easier to just have your Google if you're trying to find the answer to a question and that's what you've Googled, is it easier to just have Google itself tell you the answer to that question? In theory, yes. Does that disrupt the last vestiges of print media and their ability to profit in any way and keep their employees on the payroll? Yes, absolutely it does. Does it raise questions about the accuracy of the information being presented? Yes, it does. Does it raise questions about the ethics of taking word-for-word sentences without properly citing them? Yes, of course it does. I don't know. I'm definitely interested to see where that lawsuit goes. Because I do think that there could be... I don't know. I have very little faith in legislators at this point. I'm not confident that a lot of the people who are trying to judge the legality of some of these events actually understand what they're like the nuances of this technology and its implications, which is a whole other conversation for a completely different day. But I do think that between that lawsuit and this one, there could be some positive material changes to the landscape. But it's just going to take a while to see if those happen in the first place or how they're enforced if they do happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those funny situations, at least in the context of the Disney Universal lawsuit, because it's like, I'm on the side of the mouse. That almost never happens.
Yep.
But at the same time, there was a, the Hollywood Reporter article that I was looking at. It talks about the implications of all of this and what it can mean for studios in general. And it had kind of an interesting point of if Disney settles or if somehow they lose, that would functionally just make these studios like the I can't remember the exact word that they used. I'd have to look into the article, but basically like the guardians of the IP, and or not even guardian, but like the profiter of the IP. Like they're just there to collect money as people leverage Mickey Mouse or these different Disney characters, right? Darth Vader, whatever. They're there to say, hey, you owe me money because you use that. I guess that'd be more in the case of the settlement. If they lose, then maybe that wouldn't happen. But they wouldn't actually be making as much of the original content because it doesn't necessarily make sense for them to make the content if they can make more money just collecting on people who use the content. So that was kind of an interesting note. If they really go in on AI and they win and, put in place some kind of copyright protection, I think that's huge, because then that sets the precedent that anyone can sue AI and get money or make it more difficult for AI to just take your content. I feel like that's probably the best case scenario, but that's also because I think especially with art, AI does the most damage to how we understand and appreciate art. I think AI devalues art in a really massive way that I take a lot of issue with. I think that's kind of my main takeaway. Because if you could just make something at the click of a button that does not have the same intrinsic value as something that takes years to craft. And that's just making the thing, not even learning how to make the thing, right? Like, it's such a depersonalized experience. I think that matters way more when you're talking about art.
Right. I think, crap. I don't know. Again, without trying to wade too far into the philosophy of it, we find ourselves yet again at a crossroads of art versus content in many ways, because there's a lot of stuff that people make, right? Technically, that's out there right now. A lot of it's profitable, a lot of it's reasonably well liked. But does it constitute art necessarily, right? So in many ways, the conversation has brought us to this point where TikTok and Instagram and YouTube to some degree are all filled to the brim with extremely low effort, high yield content. Stuff that I'm not sure anybody would want to defend as art. Not all of it, mind you, but a great deal of it is not artistic expression, right? It is another revenue stream. It's putting your face and your voice out there in order to profit from it in some way without there being a great deal of care, effort, intent, or love, or craft, or training, or anything put in there. AI kind of just makes that, right? It just makes stuff. So we need to kind of, at least internally, so that I don't belabor this point for the next 100,000 years, figure out what the difference is between a 2D image rendered in an artistic manner and art, because they are distinct entities at this point. Because I don't think that AI art has that inherent human creativity, the idea that, you know, a child picked up a crayon and drew, to the best of their ability, a facsimile of their family standing in the front yard in front of the house, right? That came from such a pure place. Is there a great deal of talent? Not necessarily. It's a kid. but you can't say that it isn't art, right? It came straight from the child's imagination right out onto a piece of paper. AI isn't putting even that into it, right? So I don't think that you can say that it has that intrinsically human element. But eventually we are going to need to grapple with the difference between content and art. But I also don't think that the conversation surrounding this is nearly nuanced enough for us to have like that cultural moment, that cultural reckoning anytime soon. To pull myself out of the philosophy hole, and talk about implications ever so very briefly, to kind of echo what you've said, Zach. Yeah, studios, for all of their many problems, especially the gajillion problems I have with Disney, seeing them relegated to basically being the IP people is not great. Because ultimately those studios are still, in many cases, made up of profoundly creative individuals who have honed their craft for such a long time that they can collaborate with others to create beautiful, moving stories and incredible artistic visions and just lovely things. And to see all of that go away in favor of cost cutting because, you know, their forebears already put in the work. Now the computer can just make it. I think that is the fastest way to turn art into content. Even more than you can already argue a lot of Disney's output has become content as opposed to art. I don't know. I think what I would like to see out of this, if I had my druthers, I would like to see there be some sort of sweeping ruling on compensation for use of copyrighted images, and for there to be some way for that to trickle all the way down to the people who post their art online. They have their portfolios online. They never consented to have those portfolios scraped endlessly to train a model that would steal their job. It would be nice to see those people compensated in some way, or the models blocked from using those images without explicit consent. But I doubt that's going to happen, candidly. I think that's extremely unlikely.
I mean, we'll see. I think film and television have a unique position to set some kind of a precedent, given the unions are there. And hopefully that precedent can be expanded upon as it pertains to all creative fields. Or people learn the limitations of a, large language model, which is that it needs new data consistently. Without new human-made data, it all falls apart. And that's the part that I think people don't understand. And so I hope that things get put in place that help restrict what generative AI has access to, because I think that's the only way to really develop it in a human-centric manner. I also question whether giving this tool to the general public is truly a beneficial thing. I think part of the reason that AI is so problematic is that everyone has access to it. That's why we're seeing it being used in place of actual learning in college. That's why we're seeing a lot of these concerns from artists, is because people that aren't even artistically trained can suddenly make, I wouldn't say good art, but, art.
Passable.
Yeah,
I will say this
art.
as a person who has very little artistic ability in like a visual presentation sense, I am not going to be capable of drawing something very well at all, probably for the rest of my life. So I can say confidently that if I gave AI some sort of prompt, it would generate an image that is better than what I could generate with my own two hands.
Yeah.
But I still haven't done that because it feels bad to me. But yeah, so like I get that element of it. But yeah, sorry, I know I cut you off.
Well, I think ultimately the biggest thing here is like, would all of the people that made all of the data that AI is using now, to learn, train on, would all of those people agree to allowing AI to train on their data if they knew that AI could potentially take their job?
No.
I think that's the important thing. Some people would say yes, because a lot of the internet's just useless posts and content, right?
Yeah.
Some people would say yes, but most people in journalism, most people in creative ventures would say no. And I think that's what ultimately matters the most right now, is that if people can suddenly now say, I don't consent to AI using my art, and they can put protections in place, I think that should be retroactive. Is that the right word? I think it's retroactive.
Yeah, I would agree.
Everything that they've ever made should follow that same rule, because clearly something about AI learning on your material makes people uncomfortable. And I mean, it's mainly that it's going to potentially take your job.
Yeah, I mean, it's the problem. The problem. I mean, the big problem is there's some to quote Bo Burnham. There's some bug-eyed salamanders in Silicon Valley who decided to steal your stuff, train your replacement on your stuff, and then release it to you without your permission at all. I mean, that's ultimately what has happened. Is they decided that it would be better to ask for forgiveness than permission. They just trained it on the stolen shit and then replaced you with a collage, essentially, a really advanced collage. And yeah, I think that people should be mad about that. And I would like to see this lawsuit, if it's at all possible, sort of shape the narrative around that element of it, right? It's just, at the very least, it's something that should be given, you should be giving consent for that to happen, at the very least.
I also think that you should be given credit and cited just based on the way that the AI model works. Like, I have to give if I was to make a proper academic paper, even though that paper is wholly original in its complete form, and I don't even think that AI is wholly original, I still have to cite people at the end of the paper, because that's how you do it. AI should have to do the same thing, in my opinion. I don't think that it's okay that it just doesn't cite anything that it's pulled from for that specific image. Is that hard to do? I'm sure it might be hard to do that. Yeah. But also, I'm going to be real honest, fuck you AI companies, do better, stop focusing on money over human responsibility. It's pathetic. It's sad when you act like you don't know what your tools can get used for. You absolutely do know. Stop acting like it's some social good. It's not purely a social good. There will be plenty of negative things. You're just choosing to ignore it. I guess as we're going to finish up here in a second, we've kind of not talked a whole ton about the lawsuit itself. There's really not a ton of content there, honestly, outside of the fact that they're suing for Midjourney enabling people to make what they view to what Disney and Universal say is copyrighted content, which I tend to agree. This ended up mostly being a ramble about generative AI when it comes to image generation, but, whatever. It's fine.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, which is moderately predictable. I mean, the news of this lawsuit is only a handful of days old. There's very little other than, a couple of the snippets of some bombastic language, as you mentioned, Zach, that's kind of tasty. Like Disney calling Midjourney the quintessential copyright free rider and a bottomless pit of plagiarism, which is tasty language. But yeah, I mean, the lawsuit is obviously not active, so we can't talk about what's going on with it right now. There's very little other than these statements and then speculation on what the implications could be. So yeah, it was always kind of going to be a bit of a ramble, but hopefully you enjoyed the ride. I guess my closing summary has essentially already been said. I don't know where this is going to go. I hope that the high-profile nature of this particular lawsuit, as well as the New York Times one, at least do some work in laying the groundwork, to use the word work too much, for what we can expect from future lawsuits and what is considered acceptable in the realm of training and then utilizing AI models. I think that these could end up going away as just a complete nothing burger, and then the slow march towards death proceeds as unimpeded. But it could also end up being informative, formative, and reasonably far-reaching, depending on how it goes. So don't be surprised if we end up touching on this again at whatever point it is that there's actually something to update it on.
Yeah, I think the TLDR is that generative AI is probably here to stay in some form. It's probably going to be part of everyone's job in some capacity. I think it's hard to imagine that not happening, unless it just ends up not being profitable at all and they can't make enough money, in which case I could see it crashing and burning. That being said, I do think we need strong regulations in place regardless, even if it is here to stay. And that's what I'm hopeful for, is people wake up and realize that this tool needs to be regulated. It can't just exist without any kind of rules, because, that leads to deep fakes, that leads to better scams, that leads to real harm that happens to people. Even if I mean, that's outside of the harm that happens to artists and unemployment and stuff. I'm talking about like actual violence that can happen because of these tools being publicly accessible. AI companies need to do better. So do lawmakers and regulators. As always, the EU is probably going to champion this way before the United States.
Yeah. Put that on the bingo card.
Well, I guess we have some thank yous to say.
Yeah. You want to go first this time? I feel like I've been going first a lot.
Sure. Why not? Well, I'm gonna say a little thank you to MosscatMarket. Now, MosscatMarket helped us with our original logo and a lot of the art for our podcast. So you should make sure to check her out at MosscatMarket, both on Etsy and on Instagram. You won't regret it. She is absolutely amazing. Please show some love. And also, all of her art is not AI generated. So that's just an added bonus as well.
Yes, support humans. And on that note, support the human that is Beach Girl, which is also a band. They're a collective entity. No, Beach Girl is the wonderful creator and provider of our intro and outro music, as well as the artist behind a robust library of tunes that you can find on SoundCloud, Bandcamp, Spotify, YouTube, basically anywhere that good digital music is. Beach Girl's there. So give them a listen, check them out, and let us know what you think.
Sweet. Well, thanks for tuning in, everybody. As always, we are the AI-free podcast. None of this was made using AI, so that's exciting. But I hope you all have a great rest of your week whenever you choose to listen to this episode. And as always, thank you for tuning in. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
The internet likes to make Shrek pregnant.